What if the most dangerous secrets in elite society weren't hidden in dark rooms or shredded documents, but locked inside a single person who can no longer protect anyone? That's the question hovering over this story. And it's not a comfortable one. Because when people hear the name Ghislaine Maxwell, they think of one thing: a woman at the center of one of the most disturbing power networks ever exposed. But what almost no one talks about is this: she didn't just witness that world. She curated it. She managed access to it. She remembers who came, who left, and who benefited. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And now, from behind bars, her alleged claims are being whispered about again. Here's where things get tense. For years, certain rumors floated around elite circles, dismissed publicly as gossip while quietly discussed behind closed doors. Stories about luxury yachts, about introductions made far from cameras, about networking that didn't look like networking at all. And within those stories, according to disputed accounts now circulating online, one name appears more often than most people are comfortable admitting: Meghan Markle. Let's be clear before we go any further. What you're about to hear involves allegations, testimonies, and contested narratives. Not verdicts, not convictions, but patterns, timelines, and contradictions that refuse to stay buried. So why is this story resurfacing now? Because power networks don't disappear when exposed. They adapt. They go quiet. They wait for attention to drift elsewhere. And right now, attention is drifting back. Court documents are being re-examined. Old interviews are being replayed. Anonymous claims are colliding with carefully polished public images. And people are asking questions they were told never to ask. Here's one of them. How does someone go from relative obscurity to the most exclusive rooms in the world without leaving fingerprints behind? That question isn't about morality. It's about mechanics. Elite yachts weren't just floating parties. They were private spaces where rules blurred, hierarchies softened, and deals happened without witnesses. No guest lists, no cameras, no accountability. According to multiple accounts from that era, these environments weren't accidents. They were tools. And if that's true, then the real story isn't about scandal. It's about access. Think about it. In a world where connections are currency, who controls the invitations? Who decides who belongs? And who gets erased when the story is rewritten? What makes this even more unsettling is the silence. Loud denials are easy to spot. Lawsuits are public. But silence? Silence is strategic. Silence suggests confidence that time will do the work for you. And yet, silence also creates a vacuum. A vacuum that stories rush to fill. Because if even a fraction of these allegations are accurate, then the image the public has consumed for years is missing entire chapters. Chapters that weren't meant for fairy tales or headlines. Chapters that happened offshore, away from scrutiny, in places designed to leave no trace. And the next part of this story begins exactly there. Because once you understand how the yacht circuit really worked, the timeline starts to feel a lot less accidental. Before the palace gates, there were docks. That line alone makes people uncomfortable. And it should. Because when most people imagine power, they picture boardrooms, red carpets, gated estates. What they don't picture are yachts quietly anchored just far enough from shore to avoid attention. No press, no paparazzi, no paper trail, just open water and closed circles. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Luxury yachts have long functioned as something more than floating parties. They were filters, gateways, soft entry points into elite worlds where favors replaced resumes and proximity mattered more than credentials. Ask yourself this. If you wanted to meet billionaires, royalty-adjacent power players, financiers, and fixers, all in one place, where would you go? Not to an office, not to an audition. You'd go where no one was recording. According to multiple disputed accounts from the early 2000s, the yacht circuit wasn't random. It followed predictable routes. Cannes, Monaco, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, always during major social seasons, always overlapping with film festivals, charity galas, and high society gatherings. The same names appeared again and again: hosts, guests, intermediaries. And here's where the story sharpens. These yachts weren't advertised as anything sinister. They were pitched as opportunities. Networking, exposure, access, a chance to be seen by the right people. For ambitious outsiders trying to break into elite circles, That promise alone was intoxicating. Short moments could change lives. A conversation on deck. A casual introduction over champagne. A recommendation whispered to the right person. This wasn't about explicit transactions. It was about implied possibility. And that's what made it so effective. Because nothing needed to be written down. No contracts. No schedules. No evidence. Just memories. And memories are easy to deny. Here's the contradiction most people miss. In public, these environments were framed as glamorous, empowering, exclusive. Behind the scenes, power dynamics were uneven. Invitations weren't equal. Silence was expected. Gratitude was assumed. So when allegations surface years later, people ask the wrong question. They ask, where's the proof? But the better question is, why would proof ever exist? These spaces were designed to be deniable. That's why testimony matters so much. Even when it's contested. Because when multiple people describe the same structure, the same rituals, the same methods of access, patterns begin to emerge whether anyone likes it or not. And this is where certain timelines start to overlap in ways that make people nervous. Career gaps, sudden social leaps, unexplained proximity to powerful circles. None of it proves wrongdoing, but all of it raises eyebrows. And then there's the most unsettling detail of all. Names weren't written down, but they were remembered. By the people who arranged the introductions, by the people who decided who was welcome, and by the people who, years later, would have every incentive to talk or to stay quiet. Because once you understand how the yacht circuit functioned, one thing becomes clear. It wasn't about leisure. It was about leverage. And the next chapter isn't about the yachts themselves. It's about what happens when dates, travel windows, and personal narratives stop lining up the way they're supposed to. Because when timelines crack, stories collapse. Stories don't fall apart because they're false. They fall apart because dates stop behaving. Here's a question most people never ask. If a public narrative is airtight, why does it require so much maintenance? This chapter begins with calendars, travel windows, career timelines that look clean at first glance. Until you start stacking them side by side. That's when things get uncomfortable. Not explosive, not obvious, just off. Short gaps that were never explained. Long stretches where official biographies go quiet. Appearances that don't quite match the pace of advancement that followed. Again, this is not about guilt. It's about friction. Because when people started re-examining old material, interviews, resumes, archived photos, social connections, they noticed something strange. The version of events presented publicly relied heavily on what wasn't said. No mention of certain seasons. No clarification of how introductions were made. No explanation for how doors opened so quickly in spaces where doors rarely open at all. And this is where disputed testimonies enter the conversation. According to claims circulating online and in legal-adjacent discussions, Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly spoke about social introductions in ways that directly contradicted the polished narratives the public had been given. Not accusations, not confessions, but descriptions of how access worked. Who met whom first? Who vouched for whom? Who decided someone was safe? Think about that for a moment. In elite spaces, safety isn't about morality. It's about silence. Now here's the contradiction that keeps resurfacing. Public interviews frame success as organic, earned, almost accidental. Right place, right time. But the behind-the-scenes accounts describe a system that was anything but accidental. Introductions weren't spontaneous. They were curated. And when researchers started lining up alleged travel periods with known yacht seasons, social events, and elite gatherings, overlaps appeared. Not definitive proof, but enough to raise a simple, dangerous question. If nothing inappropriate happened, why does the timeline resist transparency? Ask yourself this. If your rise was clean, wouldn't clarity be your greatest ally? Instead, what we see is strategic vagueness. And vagueness breeds speculation. This is where emotions shift. Because no matter where you stand, there's an uncomfortable reality here. Women in these environments were often judged more harshly than the men who controlled access. Reputation became a weapon used selectively. Some stories were amplified, others buried, which leads to a disturbing irony. The same system that allegedly exploited ambition now shields itself with silence. And that silence has consequences. Because when no one explains the gaps, the internet fills them in. When no one addresses contradictions, theories multiply. And when testimonies are sealed, curiosity doesn't die, it sharpens. And now we arrive at the most telling detail of all. Despite years of rumors, speculation, and online debate, there is one thing noticeably absent: aggressive legal retaliation. No sweeping lawsuits. No definitive timeline released to shut everything down. Just distance, rebranding, and time doing what time always does, dulling outrage. But here's the problem with time. It doesn't erase records, and it doesn't erase memory. Because the next chapter isn't about yachts or calendars. It's about something far more powerful. What happens when silence itself becomes the strategy, and why that choice may say more than any allegation ever could. In scandals, innocence is loud. Silence is calculated. That's the part most people don't want to talk about. Because when accusations are truly baseless, the response is usually swift. Documents, timelines, statements, sometimes lawsuits. Loud, expensive, unmistakable efforts to shut the conversation down. But in this case, what followed wasn't noise. It was distance. Carefully managed distance. Ask yourself this. If a story has no truth in it at all, why not crush it completely? Why let it linger in comment sections, forums, and whispered conversations for years? The answer lies in how power actually works. Power doesn't rush. Power waits. As these allegations and disputed testimonies circulated, something else was happening at the same time. A public rebranding. New language. New causes. A deliberate repositioning away from earlier chapters of life. The past wasn't confronted, it was overwritten. And that's not unusual in elite circles. When narratives become inconvenient, they don't get disproven. They get replaced. Here's where the emotional tension spikes. Because this strategy works, audiences move on. News cycles reset. And anyone who keeps asking questions starts to sound obsessed, bitter, or conspiratorial. Silence turns critics into the story. And yet, silence also leaves gaps. Gaps where curiosity grows. Gaps where people notice what isn't being said. This is why the alleged claims tied to Ghislaine Maxwell continue to feel radioactive. Not because they're proven, but because they exist in a space where denial never fully arrived, where clarity was never offered, where the response was simply to outgrow the conversation. But here's the contradiction that's impossible to ignore. If these stories are nothing more than malicious fiction, why does no one want them examined under bright light? Why not demand full disclosure? Why not welcome transparency? The answer may be uncomfortable, because transparency cuts both ways. It doesn't just expose wrongdoing. It exposes systems, introductions, who benefited from proximity, who looked the other way, who stayed silent because silence was rewarded. And suddenly, the story stops being about one person. It becomes about an entire ecosystem. That's why this conversation keeps resurfacing. Not because people want scandal, but because people sense omission. They sense that something was edited out of the official version of events. And once the public senses that, trust erodes. This is where irony takes over. The same elite silence that once protected reputations now fuels suspicion. The refusal to engage becomes the loudest signal of all. And every unanswered question adds weight to the next. So here we are, not with proof, not with verdicts, but with a story that refuses to stay buried. And in the final section, we're going to confront the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the truth is never released? What if the full testimony stays sealed? And what if the real damage isn't what happened, but what we're never allowed to know? Because when the truth is locked away long enough, something else takes its place. And that changes everything. What if the most important truth in this story is the one we never hear out loud? That's the uncomfortable place we end up after everything you've just heard. Not with a verdict, not with certainty, but with a question that refuses to go away no matter how hard people try to move past it. At the beginning, we asked whether the most dangerous secrets in elite society are hidden or simply waiting. And now you can see why that question matters. Because when testimonies are sealed, when timelines are blurred, and when silence replaces transparency, the truth doesn't disappear. It mutates. It turns into speculation, into mistrust, into endless debate that benefits no one except the systems that thrive in the dark. This story was never really about yachts, or rumors, or even about specific allegations attributed to figures like Ghislaine Maxwell. Those are just the surface details that grab attention. The real story is about how power manages memory. Think about it. History isn't just written by winners. It's edited by those who can afford to wait out the noise. Those who understand that public outrage has an expiration date. Those who know that if you stay quiet long enough, the world will eventually turn its head towards something else. And usually it does. But not always. Sometimes a story lingers because people sense an absence. Not a lie they can point to, but a missing chapter they were never allowed to read. That's what keeps this conversation alive. That's why every few years, it resurfaces with new energy, new angles, new questions. And here's the hardest part to sit with. Even if nothing illegal occurred, even if no lines were crossed, the system itself remains deeply unsettling. A world where access is currency, where silence is rewarded, where proximity to power can rewrite a life while erasing its paper trail. What does that say about who gets protected? What does it say about who gets questioned? And what does it say about the stories we choose to believe because they make us feel comfortable? This isn't a call to condemn. It's a call to think. Because the moment we stop questioning polished narratives is the moment power stops needing to explain itself at all. And now the final question. What happens if the full testimony is never released? If the names, the contexts, and the details remain sealed forever? If the truth, whatever it may be, is locked away where the public can never reach it, then this story doesn't end. It just becomes a shadow. One that follows public figures, institutions, and media narratives quietly, reminding us that not everything important is meant to be proven, only remembered. So here's what I want you to do. Don't rush to judgment, but don't rush to forget either. Question what you're shown. Pay attention to what's missing. And notice who benefits most when silence is framed as dignity instead of strategy. If you found this breakdown thought-provoking, share your perspective in the comments. Not with insults, not with blind loyalty, but with questions that matter. And if you want to keep exploring stories the mainstream never fully closes the book on, make sure you're subscribed. Because this isn't the last time sealed truths will knock on the public's door. And next time, the question won't be whether the truth exists. It will be whether anyone is ready to hear it.